Hi the people, how you doing? So, today we have the camera comparison between the iPhone 12 and the Mi 11 Ultra. Now I realize the iPhone 12 is quite old considering it's last year's device, and well, the iPhone 13 is right around the corner. So I believe this is going to be the last set of comparisons for the iPhone 12. After that, it's going to be the iPhone 13 or 12s, whatever the hell they decide to name it. But today it's going up against the Mi 11 Ultra, which has somewhat cemented itself as a very strong camera competitor to any flagship really, not just the iPhone 12. So let's see how well it can perform. So for our first image right here, well, it's pretty neck and neck if you ask me. If I were to point out the biggest difference, it would probably be in the colors, because I do like the greens of the Mi 11 Ultra, but if you look at the road, there is a bit of a magenta cast on the Mi 11 Ultra, so it is sort of hit and miss if you ask me. Like, sometimes the Mi 11 Ultra can be accurate, other times not so much. You'll see that throughout the comparison. And another small difference here is that the Mi 11 Ultra has a little bit more shadow detail. But for this ultra wide image, well, yeah, here the Mi 11 Ultra is definitely pulling ahead for dynamic range. Without question, it is doing a much better job in terms of keeping the sky in check, and I really like the colors on the Mi 11 this time around. The magenta hue is not really as much of a problem on the ultra wide as it would appear, but the greens definitely look a lot more natural compared to the much more warmer tones that we can see on the iPhone. Next up for zoom, well, this is where the iPhone will falter, no matter which one, whether it's the iPhone 12 or the 12 Pro Max, which are astronomically more expensive in India, so do keep that in mind. But even so, 2x zoom would not exactly compare against 5x zoom now, would it? Both have their use cases, don't get me wrong, but in terms of versatility and in terms of the range, it's definitely gonna be a win for the Mi 11 Ultra. Now of course, the Mi 11 Ultra can also shoot high resolution images, and in this case I had genuinely thought that the Mi 11 Ultra would be the one with worst dynamic range, but it seems that is the exact opposite of what is actually happening here, because for some weird reason the iPhone decided to be quite inconsistent and just it's underexposing here. Obviously it's not bringing up the shadows not nearly well enough, and do bear in mind 50 megapixel mode on the Mi 11 Ultra does come with a dynamic range hit, like built in. You get better dynamic range with 12 megapixels. But even so, it's doing a better job here. And upon zooming in, that's even more obvious. Clearly the Mi 11 has much better detail. It is 50 megapixels, so that is expected. Now we can also take 48 megapixel images from the ultra wide, and this time the iPhone is doing a better job in terms of dynamic range. You can see the sky is much better maintained. But in terms of detail, that's a different story. You can see for yourself just how much more detail is preserved on the Mi 11 Ultra, and yes, there is a dynamic range hit, but if you use the Mi 11 Ultra's high resolution modes in the proper lighting conditions, then you can get some insanely detailed images as it would appear. Now of course we have our classic backlit test, and in this case, without question, I prefer the Mi 11 Ultra. Not only is it maintaining the highlights much better compared to the iPhone, but just check out how well the contrast is maintained. It's completely faded on the iPhone 12 there, and the Mi 11 Ultra is doing a far better job. You get better detail, you get a much more crisp looking image, it just looks good. And it is a similar story for the ultra wide shot here. You can see the dynamic range is better on the Mi 11, we have better color accuracy with the white balance on the Mi 11 Ultra, and as you'd expect, there is better detail, lower noise. Like, it's without question a slam dunk win for the Mi 11, especially in this image. Now for portraits, it's sort of a different story as you'd expect, because we have to deal with skin tones. Those are always gonna be subjective, and in this case at least I'm gonna go with the iPhone 12. Even though I really like how well the white balance is maintained on the Mi 11 Ultra, you can see the whites look pure white instead of a much more warm look on the iPhone. There's better contrast, there is better detail on the Mi 11 Ultra, but the skin tones, yeah. The skin tones do look better, at least to my eyes. I prefer how the iPhone looks. Neither are particularly accurate, but compared to the more red look on the Mi 11 Ultra, I prefer the iPhone. Now neither of these have any medium zoom range like 2x or 3x, but you can digitally crop in on the Mi 11 Ultra directly in camera to take a portrait shot. And once again, it's not particularly great, like even disregarding the fact that you are gonna lose out on details when you crop in. I still prefer the skin tones on the iPhone 12, and overall I really like the contrast this time around on the iPhone as well. But when we go to selfies, well, here things are a bit different because now the Mi 11 Ultra pulls ahead. You can see it has much better skin tones and overall saturation compared to the iPhone. I mean, the lighting conditions were quite challenging, so this was sort of expected. The iPhone tends to desaturate sometimes, and the iPhone also still has that warm cast, which I'm not honestly a huge fan of, and in this situation at least, it is giving me more than a reason to go for the Mi 11 Ultra. Now, if that selfie right there was impressive for you, well then it's gonna be pretty obvious that you're gonna be impressed by how amazing the Mi 11 Ultra's rear selfies can look. You can use a rear display on the Mi 11 to frame your shot, and you can get probably some of the world's best selfies from that phone. But unfortunately it doesn't allow us to use it for portraits. You gotta use a normal front camera for that, and I think it's a missed out opportunity, but even so, I gotta say compared to the iPhone, I still prefer the Mi 11 Ultra. Not only does it have much better contrast, you can see that it looks a lot more punchy and I personally like it a lot, but the skin tones this time around are a lot more accurate on the Mi 11 Ultra. I'd say this is probably one of the most accurate shots in the entire camera comparison, so you can use this almost like as a reference image. Now for night mode selfies, well, to be honest, neither are great at this. I think these are probably one of the weakest areas for both of these phones, and essentially if I had to pick one, I might as well go with the Mi 11 Ultra because that doesn't make me look like I'm from a noir film. But anyways, before we move on to the rear camera night modes, let's take a look at a macro image. Yep, it is only available on the Mi 11 Ultra, and granted, it is not the best macro photography on any smartphone because there are phones out there that can get way closer compared to the Mi 11 Ultra, but hey, at least you have the option to use a macro mode. Now for night mode, well, here I'd say that both are doing a pretty good job. Like if you think about it, the details, dynamic range, everything is great. Even the noise levels are pretty similar on both. I mean pretty good. And well, I think the only difference is in the colors, which is why I'm actually gonna go with the Mi 11 Ultra, because as you can see, not only do we have much better overall vibrance on the Mi 11, which makes Valentine look a good bit better, it also doesn't have any of that warm cast, which is once again present on the iPhone 12. Man, the iPhone really likes to warm things up, doesn't it? Now in similar lighting conditions, we have the ultra wide night mode, and well, to be honest, I've never really liked the ultra wide night mode on the iPhones. It always comes out as very grainy and full of artifacts. I personally have never been a huge fan of it. Like even in this lighting condition, I'm pretty sure you can see without actually zooming in just how much processing and sharpening is present. Like it really doesn't look good. Upon zooming in, it is very obvious that yes, the iPhone looks just a pinch sharper compared to the Mi 11 Ultra, which always goes for the organic look. Like the Mi 11 Ultra hates to sharpen images, and sometimes it works, sometimes not so much. At least in this case, I would have actually liked some sharpening. It would have made things stand out even more, but hey, I'd still pick the Mi 11 Ultra compared to that overprocessed look of the iPhone. Now we're going back to the main camera, and this time the lighting is a bit more challenging. Overall, both are doing pretty good, but the signature color differences are present. The Mi 11 Ultra has a bit of a magenta cast, you can see it a little bit on the table, and on the other hand, the warm cast on the iPhone is very much visible as well. So yeah, neither are particularly accurate, at least in this case, but other than that, both are doing a pretty good job. If you were to zoom in, you'll notice that the iPhone this time looks a good bit sharper, while the Mi 11 Ultra, as I said before, it hates sharpening, especially in night mode images. I wish it would add a little bit more, but hey, at least it ensures that you will never get any noise, no matter what happens on the Mi 11 Ultra. Like that's a basic guarantee here. Now the Mi 11 Ultra can also use night mode with its fairly high quality 48 megapixel 5x periscope zoom camera. Yep, it's a mouthful, but yeah, it gets some really good results. Obviously, using that periscope zoom camera would mean that the aperture would be very small, which means very less light gathering in and of itself, but even then, the amount of detail that you can get out of that 5x zoom with night mode, that's really impressive here. Obviously, the iPhone is not gonna stand a chance here. In terms of details at least, it's not even gonna be close. But it is brighter, credit where due. Up next for an ultra low light image. Well, I'd say both are doing a pretty good job here. Like, the fact that they can brighten up the image so much is quite impressive if you ask me. But I do prefer the colors on the Mi 11 Ultra. It definitely looks a lot more natural in terms of how vibrant the wall really was. And if you were to zoom in, you'll notice a similar set of differences that I mentioned before. The Mi 11 Ultra has no sharpening whatsoever, which also gives us one of the cleanest images that I've seen in this kind of lighting situation. It has no noise, no grain whatsoever. But the exact opposite is true for the iPhone 12. Because as you can see, there is a bunch of noise, but it does look a little bit sharper at least. Now for the ultra wide in ultra low light, well, I gotta say, the Mi 11 Ultra, it almost feels like it's not fully utilizing the potential of the very high quality sensor that it has, because as you can see, the Mi 11 Ultra is underexposing the image by quite a bit. Like, the brightness is definitely a little bit too low. Now this has happened like every single time I've taken an ultra low light, ultra wide image. So it's gonna be pretty consistent for everyone here. And the iPhone on the other hand, well, given that it's bright, you should expect some noise, because the moment we crop in, you can see just how much artifacting and over sharpening is present on the iPhone. It is honestly a little too overbearing, and if it wasn't this extensive on the iPhone in terms of the artifacting, well, I would have gone for it. It's giving us a brighter image, so overall it would have been my choice, but yeah, in this case, I'm definitely gonna go with the Mi 11 Ultra once again, although a little bit more brightness would have obviously been appreciated. So that is the end of our camera comparison, and I gotta say, the Mi 11 Ultra, it's very impressive, and it has its quirks. For instance, the lack of sharpening whatsoever. It does help out a lot in numerous situations. You can get some very ridiculously clean results, but sometimes you're gonna end up lacking detail in certain areas depending on the circumstance and the image you're shooting. The iPhone on the other hand, well, it's not bad. I really like the rear camera portraits on the iPhone, and that's always been the case. I've been a fan of how good portraits turn out to be on the iPhone, but without question we need more. We need at least a good high quality ultra wide sensor, more zoom, and obviously some high resolution modes if possible. Those are the things that most Android companies, whether it's Samsung, OnePlus, Vivo or Xiaomi, they're pulling ahead in those regards with their flagships, and I think that's one of the weakest areas in iPhones, inherently because iPhones in general, they just depend entirely on software processing, and I guess it's about time it changes, because clearly now more than ever we need better hardware. Of course, we'll find out what the iPhone 13 will have to offer for us. Until then, obviously do hit that like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will be seeing you guys later. Cheers.